I will call to order City Council work session Tuesday, February 9th. I need an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Seconded, all in favor?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have any public comment?
Yes, we do. Looks like John Francis.
John Francis, okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, John.
Hi, John Francis here, guest PO Box 1154, Cannon Beach, Oregon 97110. Dear members of the public, I didn't mean to address you all again so soon. As previously stated, I've only ever parachuted into Cannon Beach, so please weigh my words proportionally. I normally do not address the public, but I was made aware of your public school project. And in so doing, I learned about your agenda this evening as well, in which you are updating, potential updating your city code, as previously discussed, the infrastructure projects, the core services being relocated, your transportation plan. The whole point being the community is at a nexus of incredible opportunity, even in a time of great uncertainty. So it was only in learning about the incredible school project that I learned about everything else. So now I was addressing that. And after watching your discussion last week, I just purely wanted to state for the record, I strongly endorse all projects. And I was merely talking about if the federal government was offering a helping hand now more than ever, I would think that it would be there. And again, I'm not familiar with the material circumstances on the ground. So that was all my comment. It was a fully strong-hearted endorsement of everything. I think that you guys are doing tremendous work, and I'm extremely invigorated about all your projects. Now, just with regards to tonight's agenda and the comment that I'd like to make tonight, as previously stated, you have this incredible site. I've been able to visit right on the river there. I don't know the history of it, but I can tell you one time I've walked along your lagoons and I've seen these placards, and I see at the base of their project of, I think it may be 1994 school elementary project. I can't remember the year. But they taught me a lot, and hopefully I'm always ever learning, and I have a lot to learn from you. And you all are incredible individuals, as is every member of the public. And with this project, I see that, I looked at evaluated a lot of the different elements of the different commentary, and it looks like there's quite a bit of discussion. The only comment I'd like to make is I think that it'd be really cool to have a world-class piece of info, a performance setting, community gathering place. And I know that there's a back and forth between the classrooms and the gym. I think if you try to make it everything to everyone, it might be slightly difficult. But if you think about how you're relocating some of your other services up to that other area, maybe you could build, for instance, where you're located currently, that central area, you've got all that off-street parking. It could be a perfect spot for your gym. I was lucky enough to work in a community for 3 years. It's been very fortunate, well capitalized. They're kind of at a place where you guys just are maybe 30 years ago, when they kind of just built out all their infrastructure, maybe really cool projects. So then the final point here being that you've got this incredible site. And I think that if you could think, maybe I recently got the chance to visit the Ecola Forest Reserve. And right there, I didn't know this previously, but there's those 500-year-old trees. And maybe you could think about this community space in that longer term, a place where people could gather over a very long time. If you go to parts of the old world, there's incredible infrastructure there for many years, and many people still enjoying, those incredible sites and locations. So I would just encourage, think as big as possible. Also, if you could think about it even as an institute, for instance, it's a place of learning where everyone can learn from each other in the community, and there could be community projects. And how could we improve X, Y, or Z? I know we were talking about the infrastructure, and maybe you could think creatively together about how to create projects locally. And that's all I have to say. So I just wanted to say all that. You're doing incredible work. There's so much opportunity and potential here. It is incredible, and it must be just remarkable to be a part of. Forgive the rambling. I just wanted to endorse everything and celebrate what you guys are doing. Thanks again, and have a wonderful meeting.
Thank you, John. Anybody else, Rusty?
We had Joyce Lincoln, but I don't see her actually on the call.
Okay. I'm gonna just because we've done this in the past for the presentations, I don't know if we're going to continue doing this, but I think it's a good idea. I'm going to read off the attendees as they are at this moment. We got 2 phone numbers, 3 phone numbers: Betsy Ayers, Betty Gearin, Courtney Banks, Debatia, Frank, Hazel Schlesinger, Jillian Sorensen, Jim Pano, John Beeler, John Francis, Jordan Spencer, Kathy Klezak, Les Sinclair, Lisa Kerr, Lorraine Bosch, excuse me, Luann, Lynette, Margaret Treadwell, Mindy Hardwick, and S. Clyde. We know who that is. Okay, we can move on to our first item.
Sam?
Popping in, so let's jump right into it. Bruce, you want to introduce?
Yes, sir. We've 2 folks that have had an interest in this project for a very long time, and we're lucky to have them. We have Dick Bash from the Clatsop Nehalem Tribal Organization, and we have Professor Doug Dewar speaking. And because Dick is here, he got first choice, like in football, and so he chose Doug to go first.
In true fashion, right?
That's right. But thank you, and thank you, Roberta, for being here. Hi, Doug. Well, Doug just lit up. He's a little upset.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Doug.
Hi there. Greetings to the council and Mayor Sam. Good to see you all again on this crisp, clear night. I'm going to speak briefly here. I know that I already have, if it's okay for me to launch, I don't know if there's any more introduction required, but I'm ready to leap right into a brief PowerPoint. I apologize for those of you who weren't on the call in December. I gave an overview of the history of this site and the significance in terms of the tribal history and archaeology. I won't be covering all that tonight, but I will be just giving a quick cursory view, and then maybe at some future time we can double back and do a public presentation on that in another venue. I'm going to try to share my screen here. So let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
There we go.
Yep.
All right, very good, very good. So just to very quickly recap, for those of you maybe who weren't on the call in December, we know that the Cannon Beach Elementary School site was the site of a significant village at one time that existed there since before recorded time and continued to be occupied into the late 19th century. This place, Napas Village, was a place that was a gathering area, a place where people would gather together from many different locations as they would travel up and down the coast, including ultimately the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition who came and visited the site in the winter of 1805-06 and recorded these houses at the mouth of what they at that time dubbed Ecola Creek for the whale that had washed up nearby, the Chinookwawa name for the whale. And so they recorded these structures, these houses lived in by several people, essentially an extended family in each structure living there at that time. And people continued to live there well into the period of Euro-American occupation to the north in places like Clatsop Plains and Astoria. We know, based on the descriptions of the place, such as that in the Journal of William Clark from January of 1806, he actually describes the details of the houses there and the people who live there in some detail. And so we have an understanding of what that place looked like based on our understanding of what these kinds of houses look like in other places as well. This is a painting from a place on the Lower Columbia, very similar to what was here at the time. Fire pit in the middle of the house to keep people warm, broad benches around the outside with mats on them, places where kids can even hide out and peek at you while you're painting paintings in recess spaces, and little sleeping areas and places to store things. And so this is the kind of structure that we would have had there at the mouth of the creek during that period of time. And again, this was an important stopover place, a place where people would go by canoe. This is not our creek, this is actually in Quinault, but it's a very similar kind of scene, where people going around Tillamook Head, which is a very arduous journey by canoe, would stop when they were going north along the Oregon coast, for example, to the vast trade markets and centers at the mouth of the Columbia, hosted by Clatsop and Chinook people. And then on the return home, often with trade goods. So you had people of many different languages sharing ideas, sharing values, sharing stories, sharing information. It was a place of remarkable activity and a lot of out-of-town visitors, kind of like today, with a small resident population who hosted these people passing through. So there's something very familiar in this, even to us living here today, in spite of all the change that has happened since. And so today I wanted to speak briefly about matters of just some of the guiding values, the principles that might help us as we think about the planning for this site. I know many ideas have come forward, many very good ideas, even the public comment at the beginning of this meeting, all very helpful input. And so we've done a lot of work on this site in the past, though. We've had a lot of time to kind of think about it and review. In fact, I'm looking through my notes just in preparation for this call, found that I had about 25 years of notes relating to this site and things that we've recorded about it, input we've had from tribal members who had family oral tradition about the place, input from agencies and nonprofits about how it could be managed in the future. So to some extent, I'm distilling the results of some of those discussions just as a general, to kind of create a general set of principles that that may be relevant as we look forward in the planning process. And this is in a way to open the door for the input of tribal people who are there in the room with you, people who have a bloodline descent in relationship to this village, and so have a unique perspective and things to say about it that will follow and be maybe a bit more precise than my comments, which are much more kind of broad principles. Again, they come out of some of these early planning documents. But for example, these are documents that I'm drawing from, things we wrote with funding from the National Park Service over the years, through Portland State University, the University of Washington, where we've been able to go to the archival records and look at archaeological documents and also talk with those elders who have still some oral tradition about the significance of this place. And in this, I draw from also my work doing this kind of investigation relating to other culturally significant places of unique importance to tribes that are now in very public, visible places, and trying to kind of strike that balance, saying, you know, how do you protect something that is in some ways sensitive and has some private elements while also being in a very public place, in a very public venue? How do you strike that balance? And this is an interesting challenge because, of course, you know, people have lived here. People have lived here in, you know, this is another interior of a longhouse, but the scene would be very similar here at one time. People lived here, and people still continue to have connections to this place that are associated with those communities from back to the beginning of remembered time. And so thinking about how to summarize some of those key lessons, I started to think about what I've heard. And one of the biggest thing, the lead thing really, is that we are being asked to manage the land with respect. Respect comes in many forms, of course, but it's an overarching principle that when you talk with elders about these kinds of places, this place and others, it's the central thing that comes up. Treat it with respect, and that respect comes in many forms. So I would just go through some of what that means quickly here. It means you sustain the long-term integrity of the place, both naturally and culturally. It means you think about how to maintain integrity in different ways, avoiding eroding both the natural value, but also the cultural significance. Doing what you can to preserve the landscape as the ancestors saw it. There is something very profound to stand along that shoreline and look out toward the beach and know that the ancestors 200 years ago, 300 years ago, looked out at that same basic view. And even though there are a few houses and so forth, you can squint and see the land as the ancestors saw it. That's not something you can say just anywhere in the state of Oregon, just anywhere in the United States of America. And so it is a unique place in that it is right in the middle of a town. a town with a bustling visiting population, that nonetheless you can stand there in town and see the landscape as the ancestors saw it. There are oral traditions associated with those rocks offshore. There are oral traditions associated with the sand and the mouth of the creek. Being able to stand there and see those things and talk about them and be able to share those stories is a profound experience. And so keeping the landscape as the ancestors saw it in some way is part of that instruction we've received from tribal input. Also, of course, as you are now attempting to do through various venues, listening to native and local knowledge about the place, respecting tribal partners' input and access so that tribes can still maintain a relationship with these places. And ultimately, a very important one here that we may want to discuss in future meetings, maybe even an executive session, minimal ground disturbance. The integrity of this place is truly nationally significant. It is a place that is not only the site of a village and maybe has some archaeology there, but also is a place, Lewis and Clark site. It is of national significance. And part of what makes it unique is that there's some integrity to what is even below the ground. And so doing what can be done to avoid disturbance is not only a key cultural value from tribes, but it is also a value that's protected by state and federal law. Whenever there are state and federal permitting processes relating to this site, this is sure to come up. And so designing with this as a kind of a design principle is an important step forward. Another thing that we hear come through very clearly is that we should be honoring the uniqueness of this place. It is a treasure in its own way. It is a treasure to Native communities who have bloodline ties to it. It's a treasure in terms of the natural intersection of the estuary, the watershed, the beach. But it's also nationally significant. It could be National Register eligible, in fact, based on what we know about it. It is eminently eligible for the National Register in a couple of different ways, a couple of different criteria that are used. So recognizing that, there needs to be, as we hear from tribal elders, place-based planning, not replicating in this highly exceptional place something that can be found just anywhere in the United States. If something can be built anywhere in the United States, we know it's probably not a good fit here because this place is unique. Whatever is done there should celebrate that, should engage that, should capitalize on that, should deal with it in a constructive way. And that is a fundamental tenet that comes out of this guidance we've received. And then restoring the natural integrity of the site, for example, using plantings that are native and have biological and cultural relevance to this place. And there are many other forms in which we sort of honor the uniqueness of place, but it is, again, recognizing that this place is unique. It has a unique history. It has unique flora and fauna. All those things are an opportunity rather than a challenge here, and so should give us some guidance in what we do next. There was also strong support from tribes, from agencies. We even had offers of originally some assistance from the National Park Service to help gather up the information about this place and maybe help develop interpretation about it. So telling the story of the Native community, but also telling our own our shared stories of the community, Native, non-Native. The non-Native history of this place also is worth telling, and part of this what makes it interesting and worthwhile to the public. And makes it an attraction to the public that's worth seeing, as well as fostering public appreciation and investment in the natural world, which itself makes this place significant and is shared with past and future generations. When we look at the birds in that creek, when we look at the fish in that creek, we know that those are the descendants, in many cases, of the very same fish and birds that the ancestors were interacting with, fishing, hunting in that place. It's part of the cultural story. And it's not just a natural resource of the landscape. It is really part of the cultural story and is inextricable from it. So when we try to celebrate the culture and the history, we also have to celebrate the natural world and how it fits into that context, because the history of this place is all about that environment, that unique place. And finally, then, I know that we have the History Center, we have a number of different venues, but perhaps even helping to hold our shared knowledge and sustain our shared memory over time through interpretive media, events, booklets, whatever we have to help sustain that memory of that place and why it's significant, and to continue to hold that knowledge and to some extent in such a dynamic community as Cannon Beach, where so many people move in, move out, a lot of turnover, a lot of people passing through. It's sometimes harder than in some communities to sort of find that sort of shared storyline that we all kind of know and all kind of is familiar to us. In a way, this place can help us find that shared story and continue to tell that shared story in a way that's useful, galvanizing, bringing the community together in a way. So that's worth considering as well. And that comes right from tribal teachings, but it comes from other stakeholders as well. And finally, I would say that the guidance we receive suggests we need to proceed with a long-term vision. And again, we want to honor the past because the past is how we got here. It's part of why this place is important. The people who lived here 500 years ago saw in this place the same astonishing beauty, natural potentials, had deep connections to place. We want to acknowledge that, similar to what we possess today. But in each step, we want to ensure that we create a gift to future generations that will endure long after we're gone. So from the tribal guidance, again, long-term vision. We want to really think about what we're doing as being profound, because it is. It will shape how we talk about our own history, our own home place for a very long time to come. And so that ultimately is another goal that was brought to us through these prior runs at planning for the place. And ultimately, if we do a good job, we will preserve, like I say, the integrity of the natural landscape, the cultural landscape, and even to some extent, the shared sense of attachment, our shared oral tradition, tribal history, all that intersect at this unique place at Cannon Beach Elementary School in the Coast Village. So on that note, I thank you for your patience, and I'll happily hand it off to the next speaker. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Doug, thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Absolutely.
So I need to follow Doug.
This is Dick Bash. I just wanted to let everybody know we did switch.
Oh, okay.
Go.
My name is Dick Bash. I'm a member of the Clatsop-Nehalem tribe. And I'd like to start by saying that my mother was Winifred Bralier, and her father was Fred Bralier, and his mother was Charlotte Smith Bralier. And her father and mother were Solomon and Celiost Smith, who Celiost was a little kid when Lewis and Clark were out at the fort, and she went out visiting with her father. And I'm just wanting to show the history of my family, and some of those names might sound familiar in the history of Cannon Beach as well. And I hope to circle around back to that relationship. I'm sure many of you met Joe Scoville, who was our hereditary chief, passed away at the age of 92. Joe is the beginning of a very interesting story. He has worked with the school district to create a cultural center at the school, starting decades ago, just when the first mention of closing the school started. Joe, who was a principal himself, started meeting with the school district over that. And that went on for years. The interesting thing about Joe is his grandmother was born at the Nakoos village when it was a village, when there were very few settlers that were in the whole area. And I guess I'd like to take you back to that time when Joe's grandmother was born. Now that's just 4 generations prior to my existence, which isn't a very long time. And I'd like for everyone to imagine being at Nakoos, being at that site, and feeling and seeing what was going on. There were people cooking for visitors that would be coming. There were people that were arranging and preparing for sleeping quarters for visitors that would arrive in canoes. people would be gathering shellfish. There would be kids on the beach playing, that play being the way they would learn their life skills. Now, does that all sound a little bit familiar as to what goes on in this community right now? There also would be a space in the community back then in the village for people to present, for people to perform and interpret dances and songs. And what we are, as darn thing, the Clatsop Nehalem community would like to see is that continued. That through working with the city, the tribe is able to bring that gift of the power of that place to today. I mean, as Doug, so eloquently states, this is a place of national significance, and that means tribal significance as nations also. Tribes all across the country have heard of that place, whether it be through their contacts with the Smithsonian, the the National American Indian Museum. This is a very significant spot. You know how it is when something's in your backyard, you think, oh well. But when you get up here and you look down, it is a very significant place. We have been here before over the years and talked and discussed this with you. And I want to share with you that we members of the Clatsop Nehalem tribe have also discussed this with the Siletz tribe. We have been working and have a good working relationship with the Siletz Cultural Department. No matter how much bickering you hear goes on between tribes, when it comes to something as important as a place like this, where it has to do with our grandmothers and our grandfathers, and the culture that much of the culture we have lost. No argument there. We have been hanging on to pieces that we have picked up from our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. Joe was incredibly wealthy with the knowledge that his family had given to him. And that we also gathered some of that wealth from him that he was able to pass down. Well, no matter what you hear about tribes bickering with each other, we all come together over our culture and what is best for our people. And so, people have heard the bickering going on between Clatsop Nehalem, Siletz, or Chinook, or Grand Ronde. But the fact of the matter is, where it comes to issues like this, we pull together. And Siletz has told me, I reviewed our previous plan that we had presented. I reviewed some of the items. I reviewed the items that I'm going to try to make sure and hit all of them with the culture department at Siletz. And they have said, we stand behind those and we agree and would support these. And that's a big deal. As you know, there's these differences between non-recognized or terminated tribes and recognized government-to-government relationship tribes. And for them to have made this commitment to support Clatsop Nehalem presentation to you all is a big deal. And so I'm really humbled by that. How many times do I do this when I come? Get all choked up over. But I guess one of the most important things for us to continue to talk about is the power of the place and how we can bring that into the current day situation, our life, our children's lives. And that is these key elements. Some of them will sound familiar, they aren't new, but we might have a different take, a different outlook on them today. And I would say that we would like to honor the Longhouse. And a Longhouse is a place. Traditionally, it was a cedar plank, fire pits. I think Doug showed you some images. But the purpose of that, well, it was a place to live in, number one. But the other purposes was a meeting place, a place where people could get up and speak and talk about traditions, talk about, Doug also mentioned the rocks, the story of our coastline. Every formation has a story. And Doug is very rich in the background of those stories. I wish I was more knowledgeable. But in the Longhouse, skills are learned. The Longhouse was a huge building, and raffia, tule mat, cattail mat divided up into sections so that a certain family could live in that end of it, or an area that could be a classroom where things were taught would be in another one. And so, you know, and as you can tell, I'm starting to describe the gym and the classrooms. Honoring the Longhouse, the gym, same proportions as the Longhouse, long and skinny. No fire pit in the middle though. But it's a place for performing arts. Years ago, traditionally, when canoe families would come to visit, they would be given the floor. They would be given the floor to speak their history, tell their stories. A cultural arts building. You know, it transformed from one thing to another. One of the important things for us as a family, me as a family, and then us as a family, was that as a little kid, my family would go down adjacent where the lifeguard station thing is stored, you know, a tower. We would have bonfires and picnics out there, and somebody would cook mussel chowder, and we would have family gatherings there and eat clams, mussel chowder, and just have so much fun. And I can remember doing that since I was that big. And growing up, I didn't know that that was a traditional place that families used to go and gather. I just knew that's where we were, as kids, that's where we were drunk, you know? I mean, you just went where your families went. And it wasn't until I got much older that I realized the reason my mother and her family went there was because her grandmother and her family used to go there for family gatherings. And so moving on up to the Lewis and Clark sesquicentennial, being there as a kid. I think some of you have seen those pictures of me standing there as a little 8-year-old talking to Captain Clark. And then a cousin dressed up as Sacagawea, you know, it was this big event. But to when we had the welcoming pole, where Roberta and I and Guy Capoman, the artist, jumped in and cleansed ourselves. And had a little ceremony. It's important to have these small gathering places outside where people could, you know, sit on logs like we used to do, but to have like a circle outside with a fire pit and like a small amphitheater, or where stories could be told outside, whatever the configuration of the seats are, that it be able to happen out there and to gaze out at the ocean and the beauty of Mother Earth, and to hear people share their stories. An important thing that we have also talked about, and that we feel is just so important to include, is a native plant garden. That it is a place to grow native plants, to teach people about the medicinal uses of plants, from curing to supplementing, you know, from supplementing for vitamins to curing for different illnesses. And to take care of the invasive species, to work on getting those out of the area and replant with native plants. Just for the well-being of the ecosystem. And as I said earlier, one of the ways that our children traditionally would learn is through play. Many of the activities would have to do with throwing, with having to do with things that would build upper body so that when they got bigger, they could row in the canoe. So that to have an area where kids could play and learn certain skills, balance skills. I guess I was going to say I'm not a PE teacher, but but I think you get my point. And many of these things that I just listed were in our original vision plan that we worked on with the city. Some, I don't know how many years ago, who all was around then. So you remember how 5, 6, 7-ish, 8.
Around 8 years ago, yeah.
And so I did look at that visioning plan, and the tribal council and I discussed those, and we looked at what, for the sake of the tribal community and for our interpretation or our knowledge that we have of the Canada Beach community, what would give the most to all community members? And these were the things that were at the top. In addition to working jointly in developing interpretive panels, interpretive signage, educational materials that would talk both about culture, history, native plants, and the current community of Canada Beach. I did remember to circle back to Grelier. I was surprised on that. As I mentioned, my mother was Winifred Grelier, and her father was Fred Grelier, whose sister came down to Canada Beach and married Osborne's. And so we would also come down to the Osborne store and visit Don Osborne down in Manzanita, who is my mom's cousin. So I mention that because you look how our families have combined and how my mother was always proud of Grelier Road down south. But you look how our families have intertwined over the years so that, you know, I have both Clatsop and Nehalem family heritage as well as Osborne, although I'm not an Osborne, but, you know, family connections. And it's so important. And it's so important for the vitality of Canada Beach to remember those roots and to want to keep those roots alive, those histories. So with that, I would like to close and thank you so much for inviting us back.
I want to add something. My name is Roberta Bash. I'm the wife of Richard. I am a Puyallup tribal member, as well as tribal heritage from many, many different tribes. As Doug Durr and I discussed many times, our culture is very much the same from Alaska all the way down to Tillamook. And so I was invited to be and represent the tribe on cultural matters. So I'm a member of the cultural advisory committee for the Clatsop Nehalem tribe. And when this was discussed a long time ago with Betty Obrist from Manzanita, Joe Scoville, Diane Collier, who lives in Warrenton, we discussed it on the property and wanted to make sure, because the tribe in history has always been a welcoming tribe, the place was meant to help bring people in, to share our culture, to share our food. That's what Cannon Beach does right now. Everybody, not just the tribe. So those values continue to exist. And so although the tribe says this is what the tribe wants to do, we want to make sure that members and community within Cannon Beach play a very active role. So everything that's described here, we talked about having artists, native artists, non-native artists, so that everybody can share the heritage as we have grown throughout history together in one place. So that tribal culture, tribal history, tribal values, as well as the history of other members of Cannon Beach can do the same place, do the same thing in the same place, so that this would be shared activities with everybody's culture, everybody's drive to educate people, not only about the values, tribal and non-tribal experiences, but the respect for the land, the respect for the values that Cannon Beach continues to offer. And that's for the land and for the people and continued sharing with everybody. So, and that we talked about that again, and Dick covered a lot, but just wanted to make sure that we circled back in the discussion
I
that
forgot. to
all the
circle back.
elders talked about with Dick involved. So
Good job, Roberta.
Thank you very much, you guys.
We've talked about it a long time, but we're finally to the point where it's going to happen.
Good.
Very
Again,
nice, Dick. And
Kevin,
I would like to just remind you that this isn't the last time. We're going to see you several times yet to come.
Good,
yes,
good.
You know, tomorrow you might want to zoom in. We've got a meeting talking about what's next about the project.
Okay.
So 6 o'clock, and you can go on our website and get the Zoom and stay up to date.
Okay.
And also, we've got all of the previous meetings on our website to see what the discussion has been.
I really like to thank you for letting us come in. I don't do much on Zoom.
That's okay.
It's hard for me to speak to you all when I'm looking at the computer screen. So thank you.
thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Okay. That takes us to what's next? Cola Creek Forest Reserve Management Plan. Yeah.
Bruce, I don't know when you want to have us bring her in, but Joyce is now on, and we can get her on
Oh,
possibly right after the presentation you just saw.
okay. No problem. Let's bring Joyce in and
She was there and then
Yeah, never mind. She just dropped off. I'm sorry.
I have to talk to her. Okay,
Yeah.
Rick?
You want to wait for her, see if she gets back on?
No, I don't think she'll be on this item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I wanted to talk to you tonight a little bit about the Cola Creek Forest Reserve Management Plan update. A little bit of a background I'd like to give you guys is, first of all, we'd like to take an opportunity to commend the Parks and Community Service Committee for the excellent and passionate work on the ECFR plan. I've had an opportunity to work with them over the past year and a half and have good, vibrant discussions about it, and they care very deeply about the ECFR. We do have concerns about that resolve around the responsibilities that the city has for emergency management and protection of our watershed. We have had conversations with the chief of the Cannon Beach Fire Department and representatives of the Oregon Department of Forestry that indicate the need for greater road access to stop fire spreads before it reaches the city's watershed. In the wildfire risk assessment, there is some conflicting information between the importance of road access and roads and trails improvements that likely increase the risk of wildfire ignition due to people's presence there. We also do have a challenge with agreeing with some of these conclusions, but we're not here to really debate those conclusions. The point that we're trying to make to council is that if a fire does approach our watershed coming from outside the ECFR or inside, the city and outside agencies would have an extremely limited access to prevent a fire from burning down the watershed. Having limited access to keep people out of the ECFR will also result in reducing options for firefighting professionals to protect the city and the watershed from wildfire. We are not looking to make any kind of patchwork of roads to the ECFR. However, we're trying to maintain and provide some access for strategic areas that are important. Our suggestion is to resolve the situation might be able to add a line to the 2019 ECFR report, such as city staff will study making road improvements for the purpose of combating and preventing wildfires in the ECFR. Any proposals will be brought to the city council for the consideration and to gain public input prior to council making a decision. Our recommendation is that the council is consider allowing road improvements in ECFR for emergency management purposes. I've invited Fire Chief here tonight, and we've also had discussions with Oregon Department of Forestry representatives as well. Any questions?
I served on the Parks Committee for probably over 20 years and was involved when we started working on the project. Have you investigated the OWEB grants to see if that sort of work would conflict with the agreement when we purchased the property and got the grant? Because they have certain criteria that you have to meet about how, it was $1 million grant. So it was a very appreciated grant, and it helped us get the land. So I just want to make sure that that is looked at. When Barry Sims came from Trout Mountain, and he has been with us since the inception of this program, he said at one of the meetings we had, I think it was about a year and a half ago, maybe, or maybe a year. And he said that he really didn't feel, number one, he thought we had thinning projects we could do, but as far as preventing a fire, it's going to happen where it starts, and that the usual approach is to go in and get it from that advantage. We know that 96% of the fires are caused by humans. And so to encourage these sorts of accesses, I think, could create more of a situation than actually we would have otherwise. I know Jelaine was going to be on the phone and available, but I also would like to have her input on what I perceive to be what our meeting was. Is she available?
Yes.
Would you like to bring her on now, Robin?
Yes, please.
Ready, Jelaine?
There I go. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, let's see. I have some thoughts about this and specifically related to the suggestion of preemptively putting roads into areas of the reserve that are remote and difficult to monitor. When we considered the assessment done as the 5-year update, when we considered this, we considered it in a lot of detail, and we spoke about things such as thinning, what the implications of having roads and more activity in the reserve would be, the implication of improving roads, increasing more road access, and really looked at it from a pros and cons approach. A lot of the projects that were initiated or described in the 2013 plan, we spoke to each one of those, and I would really invite the council to look at the appendix with the committee's recommendations, because we really did thoughtfully look at each one of those projects and looking at it through the lens of the current conditions and the current challenges that we have in the reserve and our overarching stewardship mission, which is to protect those lands. So the concern about putting a road in for a potential event is that it also increases access by people, and that is the single highest risk factor for fire. So a couple of things that just to consider with this. For example, there's some recreation activity that happens on neighboring lands. Hunting and other kinds of recreational activity is permitted. And my understanding is that on those lands, they have a way of tracking and monitoring and knowing who's in those spaces and when they come and go and for what purpose. If we were to start putting road access in the remote areas of the reserve that are adjacent to those areas where people are already recreating, I think it poses a real danger in terms of fire risk, because if people see a road going into a forest, I think the likelihood is that a percentage of them, signs or no signs, would be inclined to want to explore. And we do not have a way of monitoring in those areas of our reserve. They are remote, they are far away from the areas that are currently publicly accessible. And to do this preemptively seems to me problematic. I noted in the staff report that there was some quotes from the assessment about particular the reserve in terms of the topography, the types of forest, the likelihood of risk should a fire occur, and its likelihood of spread. Now, I see in the staff report that there was a disagreement about that. However, I think without really considering that in detail and the rationale for why that assessment was made and the factors that informed that assessment, I think those are all factors that we have been looking at for some years in our discussions and that informed our recommendations. So to make a move to increase access in the reserve, I think even if it is intended for emergency purposes only, and I hear that loud and clear that it's really being looked at through that lens, I think another consideration is that if it is, once the road is open, it's very difficult to ensure that the only activity up there would be for emergency purposes only. And that's a real concern, even though that might be the intent and the intention at the outset. So a way that I've been thinking about this is really the lens that you're looking through. So the committee is tasked with looking through the lens of stewardship and a broad assessment of fire risk in the reserve, specifically as relates to human activity in the reserve. And through that lens, we're really looking at preventing the circumstances and the conditions that could result in a fire. And I know everybody wants to prevent the occurrence of a fire up there. And that's really the lens that we're looking through with these recommendations and with the overall stewardship plan. And I do understand that if you're looking through a very specific lens of an event happening, that could bring you to a different conclusion. But I would just really ask the council to consider this in its entirety, to look at the entire plan, to consider the appendix where we address each one of those previous projects and the rationale for our recommendations in each one, because it really does reflect a thoughtful consideration of that. And I know that everybody here wants to protect that land, and that's the intention behind all of this discussion. So I thank you for hearing me on that, and happy to answer any other questions.
Mr. Mayor, may I respond?
Please.
This is Bruce St. Dennis. And Joanne, again, thank you for all the work that you folks have done. I totally get where you're coming from on it. I think that there's one issue if a fire starts in the ECFR. I think what we saw in California is it doesn't matter where it started, it's where it's headed. And there is, without an ability to go ahead and build a fire break on the east side of the ECFR, we would need access to be able to do that. If it was coming this far, there's no other place to break it other than at 101. And we were told that if there's a large fire coming across, we can try to stop it. If we have access, we don't have access, will fight from 101, which means the fire would come through the ECFR because they were going to be trying to stop the damage to the city. So when I understand about the potential sources, I've also looked into, when we're talking about the 96%, that's not necessarily just a campfire or somebody dropping a cigarette. That includes slash burns, which I don't think we'll be doing. It includes power lines, which we already have, those sorts of things. So there's a number of sources we already have. And it's not 96%. It's something less than 96% would be caused by, inaction of somebody walking through. So what our recommendation is to council is that, we have the ECFR. And again, the Parks and Community Services have done a great job providing us with plans for that. But we also have a watershed and we also have a city. And so those are all things that when we're in an emergency management standpoint, it's beyond somebody dropping a cigarette or something. It's going to be what happens from somebody else's property and a fire coming in. Also, the type of road that we're talking about would be gated. So, and frankly, these roads are already there. They need to be maintained so that we can, operate on them. But we're not looking to put in a bunch of roads, but I strongly urge council to consider the responsibility we have to prevent the spread of a fire into the city. And that's why we're saying if there is some sort of a road system, and again, we're not talking about adding a bunch. It's largely going to be maintaining what's already there that is not being maintained, and then allow some chance for professionals to be able to come in and stop the fire before it gets here. Thank you.
So are these basically former logging roads that you're talking about?
Yes, these are already built roads. These are already access roads. I went on a walking tour on all these roads last week. I was able to walk from the ECFR to each one of these locations currently. This is not building new roads. These are just maintaining the current roads that are there and make sure that they're able to get emergency vehicles into them to patrol if they needed to go chase spot fires. This is not cutting in new roads.
I remember I was at a parks meeting, well, I guess it must have been almost a year ago, when they were talking about this. And one of the problems is even maintaining the road and improving it. It's going to take equipment and a lot of money to do that. Can you get equipment in there to improve the road?
You can, both accesses, as I gained access through both these locations from the eastern slope of our ECFR. One was through access, all of them were through actually access gates and locked and controlled areas. And we're able to drive right to them. And so it's not a matter of getting access to them, that already exists. It's just a matter of maintaining them to where people can, emergency fire equipment can get down.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these things that we're talking about here, which are great points, really come down to there's currently is people in the ECFR today. They're in there every single day. You also have natural hazards in there that we saw this year in 2020. Behind us had one of the most outrageous fire conditions and red flag warnings that they've ever seen in the state of Oregon. You also have a major power grid that comes right through the ECFR. Access to the entire ECFR, we don't have the luxury of not having access. It already exists. The key is, do you have the access to the roads that are currently there so you can get companies in there, firefighter companies in there to stop small fires when they're small.
I don't know if you saw the story in the Oregonian about the forest reserve. It was a very long, detailed story telling people how to get in there and how to, what's there and all the natural abundance there. So it's getting some notoriety in terms of.
Yeah, and really this conversation is actually about protecting it more than anything. Without the ability to protect it from a wildfire, which we saw in the state of Oregon at a horrific rate this year, you don't have any options to protect it.
Mark, do you want to say anything?
I think I agree with what Rick's saying. Is I walked a lot with Rick, And we're not talking about putting a bunch of roads in. The concern was, people in there, people are already in there. You can walk all these roads right now, but we can't get a vehicle down. And if I can't get a vehicle in there and get it turned around, I'm not gonna get it in there and be stuck in there. We've got to get the roads open if we're gonna do anything about it and get in there so we can turn the vehicles around. And that's what we're after, is cleaning the roads up so we can get down into these spots and stop it before we're stopping it at the town.
Yeah, and when we talked to the Oregon Department of Forestry, who was gonna come up and support our operations, right now they look at it and say, we're not going in there. The key is when you can take them in there and tour them those areas and say, okay, these are remote areas that people don't get into, but can you get in there? And then you come up with a firefighting plan, and those same companies then can reflect back and say, okay, these are the access points. This is how we get in there if there's a small fire. This is how we will fight those fires. Right now, there's no option to fight a fire in ECFR. Unless we go down the main road that takes us back to the springs, and you can turn around there, but it's also one way in and one way out, not a lot of options.
So when you talk about getting access, are you talking about getting access from the forest lands up to the eastern?
Yeah, we're not talking about driving through the springs and through the roads. We're basically talking about if you had access on the outside of the Greenwood land, which is already there, and you can get deeper into some of these remote areas that roads already exist, then you have a chance to actually stop some of these remote fires.
Okay, so you have access up to the boundary.
Correct.
And then you talk about the roads. There's roads all over the place. Some improved, some light rock, some old grade, some. And so what I see, and I think what others are seeing is, oh my gosh, you're putting a whole network of roads in there.
Yeah.
I haven't heard you say, we just need a single line access or a T road or.
There, believe it or not, there was a small map that I was going to provide you guys, but it wasn't brought for this meeting. There's two specific roads that we feel should be put into the plan, which are not all those little ones. They're just two from the remote areas on the eastern slope.
But and the reason it wasn't supplied is we didn't want to get into a discussion about, well, you could do this one or extend this one. What we asked for in the recommendation is just let us bring you something, but not approve a plan that precludes any work being done on those roads. So what we could do is go ahead and bring it in for further discussion. But that was why we didn't include the map on it.
If you did that, I would like to have Barry Sims come, who has been very good over the whole time of helping us with that, to protect it as much as possible, and also to check the OWEB grant.
Sure.
To see what kind of rules there are for us to have that grant, because it was $1 million. So it's something that is important to adhere to.
And that is a good point. Most of us are here for a relatively short time, don't have that history. So we will check the grant requirements.
Can we get a group together to discuss this with council?
Well, we have a group, and that's the group that wrote the review of this whole area.
I think the key is to keep working with that group.
And yeah, and they've spent.
And that was last year before fire was ever an issue.
But this last year, they did talk about fire. There's quite an extensive discussion about fire and the risk of fire and so forth. And my discomfort is they've done all that work, and now we say, okay, staff, draw us up a roadmap and bring it to the council. I'm not at all comfortable doing that. I'd say work with the Parks Committee and then bring something that you agree on, or at least there's argument and counter argument, bring that to the council.
I agree with
No,
that.
and the conversation we had last year with them had everything to do from forest thinning to ecological issues to firefighting. So it was complicated. This is very specific.
And we can do what you're talking about.
But we should treat it as a whole, not just as one feature.
We need to make sure that we know that we're talking about just one feature. Sometimes the conversations lead all over the place, and then you're talking about everything. We want to make sure that we're just talking about emergency vehicle access for firefighters.
Part of the discussion was the thinning process and other things. And, all those things can contribute or prevent or whatever. We're just saying that even if the fire comes from someplace else, what can we do to go ahead and protect the city, protect the watershed? And we're very limited now. And so to continue that conversation with Parks and Community Services, that's fine.
Yeah.
But we just, felt the need to raise the hand and say, just understand that the way that this is heading is that limits our ability to fight a fire. But we understand all the other points about preventing. We get that. But if it happens someplace else and comes on to us.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Let me chime in here. During the discussion for the forestry reserve purchase, I was on that board. There was a lot of concern about protection of the property for the future, for its environmental aspect, but also protection for its woodland existence. And fire protection is protection. 3 of the management objectives says protect. Our difference, it sounds like, from what I'm hearing from the different presenters, is how do we protect it? If a fire starts and we can't get to it, that's not good protection. If we open it up so people can sneak in there and start fires, that's not good protection. The philosophy of how we should go about this needs to come from the city council, not from other committees or staff. We are the ones that have to say the protection of this zone of natural wonder actually is the key element. And I'm on I understand the idea of limiting access to it because that's going to limit the potential of a fire starting. But even if some odd instance happens, either from human or from nature or from power lines, and you can't get in there to fight it, the whole thing gets burned down. So my sense right now is I'd rather be able to fight the fire that happens and contain it within a smaller area rather than, oops, if the fire does happen, but it's a less potential of it happening, but it will burn down the whole forest. That's not a win for me. So I do remember the discussions about saving the roads. There was talk about literally getting up there with a D10 cat and grading them up and plowing them up so there would be no roads. But we talked about saving them so that we had the potential to use them if we needed them. That was a key element in the original discussions. It's come to that point where I think we need to strongly look at the idea of saving what's there. The road network that's already there is totally functional. It just needs mowing and a little trimming here and there, and give Mark a place that he can turn around the truck. I don't see any new roads happening. I don't see any new grading that is dramatic. I don't see some of the other concerns that were happening during the discussion. It's just access so we can get in there and fight the one little fire that might happen. So that's my position.
I do have a question in terms of again, going back to my original question, can the roads hold the weight of an engine or equipment coming in? Because I know that was one question that people had originally, is whether it really could hold the weight, because there was so much degradation of the road.
Well, when we walked them just the other day, you do need to maintain them. And so there is some maintenance issues with getting this to where they don't wash out, they don't just deteriorate. It does cost resources to do that. But they all carried big equipment at one point. And it's not that hard at this point to get them back to at least a usable piece of road system.
And we're talking about putting trucks up there. We're putting pickups up there. We're not putting, 1,000-gallon engines up there. We're putting 300-400-gallon brush rigs up there.
And you do have a brush rig now, don't you?
Yes, we have brush rig.
Yes, that's all.
And I want to make sure that there's another distinction that on one hand, we're talking about the ECFR and I understand the importance of that. I think that staff's bigger concern is the ECFR is the watershed. And so that's really, if it was just the ECFR, I understand it all, it's our watershed. So that's really what I think in my mind, we're protecting.
Well, it's also our town too. And
Yes.
all the residents up there in that
Yes.
area too.
Yes.
I'd just like to know what roads we're talking about. We keep talking about roads and access and you look at this and there's roads all over. So you come back, these are the roads and here's how they provide the minimal invasion with maximum benefit.
Yeah, when I walked them the other day and we drove them the other day, they're there and it's something that we can easily take a trip out there so you can really get your eyes on it and see what we're talking about. And it's not just every single offshoot, it's just the main thoroughfares that are in there. There's two that particularly that are important to that type of access.
So we can arrange for counselors to go up if you want to see what we're talking about.
Yeah, I remember when we were wanting to enhance the roads and we were going to use money from timber sales to afford that. And then the timber prices went down and we decided not to do anything at all. So there was a big push at that time for the roads to become very stabilized. And I think we decided as a committee not to do that because of the accessibility it would create.
There's a lot of grant funding out there. The chief was just telling me about that maybe a potential for us to utilize in the future, be able to put those resources into those roads.
As long as it doesn't conflict with the OWEB agreement.
And we'll check that. You're right. We'll check that. So we talked about having staff work with the committee. We talked about council making the decision. So I'd like clarification on what the expectations are of the council.
I guess I mentioned it, so I will say that the key word is protect. And I think even the OWEB grant would support I know State Forestry has really done a lot of research on fire in forests, especially recently, but they started this long before last year's worst case. They were really studying it. And I think this concept to me needs to be focused on the protection of the forest in the light of the fact that we don't want to burn it all down. We don't want it to burn all down. In the worst case scenario, we want to be able to up there and catch it or block it from coming from somewhere else. But primarily catch the small fire before it turns into the big fire.
How much work has the parks, how much have you worked with the Parks Committee on this?
Last year I was able to talk to them at length about it, but it was a complicated conversation because we talked about several things. And we ended up having Barry come in, concern against forest thinning versus natural wildfire potential and everything like that. So it wasn't really a conversation just about fire protection. That was just one part of it. And it got to be kind of it got to be complicated because everybody emotionally was pulling in all different strings about what this means. there's nothing wrong with having the conversation globally, but specifically, this is the part that needs to be very direct about what we're talking about. And so I'm not sure if they were able to hear that part of the conversation. But it was laid out for them clearly.
But we've got to listen to our fire specialists. You know, that's what they do is fire management. And I guess I'd just like to see what that recommendation is, rather than a suggestion that we just tell staff to consider it and come back to the council. As long as it's being considered with the Parks Committee and then comes back to council, I'm fine with that. But it ought to be very specific. Why this road and not that road? We're not going to do all roads. What's the advantage of connecting from point A to point B? Do we need turnarounds? Are we going to have a complete two-way exits? You know, are you going to be dead ending? Those things I know you guys don't want, but I don't see on here. I see one obvious maybe loop, but I feel like there's just a lot of arm waving here. Let's build roads. Well, give me a map. That's all I'm saying. I want to see a map and a reason for selecting those particular roads, how they would provide the access that will protect our watershed. And that's what you plan to do all along, but we have Barry Sims and we have a lot of people that have spent a lot of time thinking about this. And yeah, it's messy. You come in specifically, these are the roads. This is how you would get to those roads. Here's how you'd get out. And here's the area that could be protected by that road. I think then we can start to talk about making a decision.
And we can provide that information, but I would also ask that each counselor let us know if they want to take a ride up there so they can see the current conditions. They can, put eyes on, what it is that we're talking about doing before we bring it to you. So we could probably bring it, I think, March 9th, and I don't have the agenda in front of me, but that is probably the first time that we would be able to do that. And something else I want to point out, we are very impressed with everything that the Parks and Community Services presented on the ECFR. There's just a disagreement on the ability to deal with fire as opposed to relying on there not being a fire. So that's really where our difference is.
I guess I'm feeling a little, I understand Sam's point that it's the council decision on this, but I'm feeling a little uncomfortable with the Parks Committee. It doesn't sound like the Parks Committee's gotten too involved in this, and they've done the report, and we have that. Was there a staff report that was supposed to come with this tonight?
No, it would, because the base question is just, which side are you going to fall on with this? And then it was like, if you want us to bring you, a map or something, we can do that. We can take you out there.
Well, I just feel like, I just worried that the Parks Committee might feel like they got kind of detoured around before they had any participation in this particular decision.
I think that we had some, I forgot where Rick's word was, but I think staff was very clear that, fighting fires, that sort of thing was important. And I know that the committee did their due diligence and talked to the gentleman from Trout Mountain, that sort of thing. I don't recall, and I think that was on me not to have somebody there, but I don't think we actually talked about somebody from the fire side as opposed to somebody to the forest preservation side. And that's what we're talking about now. But we can do it any way that you would like, but it is absolutely a policy question for the council is where are you going to come down? Because I think that all the points that the committee has made are valid. I feel very comfortable with points that the staff is making. I don't see a way to resolve it by meeting in the middle. Maybe we do less roads or something, but I think it's going to be hard to be able to go ahead and, serve both sides. And so it's a policy question. What is your idea of protection? And is it limited access or is it the ability to fight? So that is your purview.
I've said it too many times now, but I want to see a map.
You can do it.
What roads are you talking about? I don't want to go out and drive around and look at a bunch of roads, not knowing that that's necessarily the one that's going to meet our fire suppression requirements. What are we, we've had all this conversation. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, and Mark Morgan's there's a road that goes the whole way down
There's one that goes
that's
down.
parallel to the whole reserve.
And
So,
that might be one that makes a lot of sense
yeah, and it's there already.
and it may need some maintenance. And if that's all, let's go for it. But then I see these unimproved and those that have a little rock, but they're overgrown and the culvert. That's great. We're talking about those? Yeah, I just don't know what we're talking about. And it's not unusual, I guess, but
Mike, the information that you're requesting is just what we asked or recommended in the staff report. Did you let us bring that information?
We don't have a staff report.
No, but what we're asking for is
recommendation that they asked.
the recommendation, because that's not what the recommendation is in the ECFR report. We're saying we think you need to add this. And if you agree, you want to look at it, we will bring you the additional information. If you don't want to see it, that's fine. But one thing I did want to avoid tonight is getting into, the map of the roads, and some of them are hash marks and some of them are dashes and all that, without having gone up there, without having more ability to go ahead and present a more complete presentation.
Yeah, all I got is staff report materials forthcoming. I don't see anything else. I mean, I don't even know what this.
Can I share this?
Not right now, Rick. I think that we just need to go on to the next thing. If you want us to bring it back, we'll bring it back.
And I really would like to have the parks
Sure.
look at it because I think they have the background from the meeting that was most recent. And Barry Sims.
Yeah, I agree. There needs to be some access for fire prevention. Fire prevention should be number one. I sit in my backyard every summer and think, when's the fire coming?
Yeah, I guess just having city staff take a look at it and present their recommendation, that's great. But the letter we got said to include a line in the EFR report that says this will be done. I think that was jumping ahead.
I didn't even get that. All I got was staff report and materials forthcoming, and I got nothing else.
Materials forthcoming was when we were going to do a much more detailed report. And what the intent was to be able to move forward with approving ECFR with another line in there saying that we're going to look at fire suppression, as some point in time, of being able to approve the ECFR report, because it's a very good report. So that was the intention. It was on me, because if the information said additional material forthcoming, I should not have put that in. It was going to be in an earlier version.
Sounds like to me that we need to hold off on the ECFR report or approval until we've had this presentation so that we can detail out the fire suppression proposals. So I'm sorry to say that we should just postpone the approval of the ECFR at this moment. Rather than putting in some vague language saying that we are going to do something included in this, but we don't know what it is yet. So that's what I'm hearing.
Joanne's got her hand up.
Sure, Sam.
Pardon?
I agree, Sam.
Okay, thank you. And what was the other one? They both said at the same time, so it was hard for me to hear.
Elaine has her hand up.
Oh. Okay,
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion. I just wanted to point out that the report, just the comment about adding language to the report, that report was produced by Trout Mountain. Our recommendations were our recommendations in the appendix, and I appreciate that there'll be further discussion because I think inserting language into either of those would require the kind of discussion that you're talking about. Thank you.
okay. Council?
So we are supposed to bring back maps, et cetera, to the March 9th meeting? Or do we meet with I'm sorry, we meet with the Parks and Community Services Board first and then bring it to you. So it'll probably be April at the earliest.
I think that's probably good because I'm totally confused about what it is. It sounds like what you want is a line in the plan that says we will look at protecting the ECFR from fire. We will provide fire protection, but whatever that language is something that we need to look at. So you need to work with the Parks Committee that's producing the recommendations to get that line in. And then we look at the line, I guess, along with the maps and so
Well,
forth.
they recommended something in the staff letter, I don't know what it is. Just recommended our suggestion to resolve the situation, in other words, this argument might be to add a line to the ECFR report, such as, quote, city staff will study making road improvements for the purposes of combating and preventing wildfires in the ECFR. Any proposal will be brought to the city council for their consideration and to gain the public input prior to council making decisions. It seems like that's what we would do anyway.
Right.
And so I just don't know why that goes into the ECFR report.
Because
Let's say we can never go in and put any fire roads in. This report's buttoned up.
I don't know exactly how to word it, but I do believe there's a don't improve the roads section or conclusion. And so that's why we think that there ought to be something. And again, I think my recommendation would be approve the ECFR with a line that we're going to go ahead and look at roads because they've been working on that for years. And I think mostly it's very good, you know, with this exception of this, you know, one issue.
Is that something you got that you wrote, or is it something?
It's something, it's a letter.
Great. You have it.
Staff report on.
Nancy. That would probably be the second page of the staff report. Okay. This, I think, went out later, so maybe you have the original packet. And then this information was sent after the initial went out.
Well,
I think what we should do is have Parks and Trout Mountain and a map and a presentation.
Okay, and I would like to have, who is it, Oregon Fire?
Oregon Department of Forestry.
Yeah, I would like them there too.
The Fire department there as well.
Yeah. Because they were not there when this decision was made. They were not included.
And then at that point, if we make a revision or amendment to the ECFR, everybody's had their input. We've heard the discussion from, as you say, both sides. And then we can make that amendment at that time. Right now, just making an amendment to their report that they've spent years on. I think Sam's suggestion is good. to go with it.
Can somebody just tell me what Sam's suggestion was? Because we've been through so many iterations. What is it you expect?
I'll let Sam say, maybe it's,
It sounds like we need to have a joint meeting with full presentation from the fire concern angle, and then have discussion with all parties. Everybody that's been mentioned can have access to the information so that they can make comment. And that way we then can make a decision which way to go.
yeah,
Okay, all right. I'll let y'all know when we can schedule that.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we can move on to code audit request for qualifications. Jeff.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I'm brought back the code audit request for qualifications. I removed the support letter and the other materials for the TGM funding and all of that. And just brought back the request for qualifications, which shows the scope of work and then a example contract agreement. And just wanted to get your input on that, and recommendation is to for you guys to approve this with any kind of changes you want to make, and then allow us to start posting for this.
Jeff, do you have a time frame for this? I didn't see any time frame in here.
Yeah, you know, it's in the, there's a quasi one posted within the document that tells the time when we were going to post it and get it back. So I think it's approximately about a 6-week window to get it out and back, and then a month or so to get it out. We had said originally that we'll do this code audit starting early summer. And then when we started talking about possibly doing it in conjunction with the transportation TSP, we said possibly in the fall. Well, there's no reason we have to wait till the fall. We can start in the summer. So that's what this window would allow.
And then how long do you think the whole process might take?
It's usually about a year process. I mean, once you get everybody on board, it's about a year process, just like the TGM. I doubt it would even take that for just the code audit, because that's usually including a rewrite of the ordinances.
What it says down here is March 12th would be when they would start accepting submittals, and until March 26th. That's on, the pages aren't numbered. It's the second page of project under instructions to applicants.
And pretty much anytime we do like an architect or an engineer or a planner, something like that, it's 90 days. You can cut it and mesh it and everything else, but and depending on how many people are involved with the selection process, it's 90 days.
You know, I felt that this whole thing had to do with tightening up what we had, where I'm reading modernizing the subdivision and zoning ordinances to allow for flexibility and creativity in land use and housing development across the community. So I'm seeing that it's opening it up instead of narrowing it down. That's always been our concern, is that we aren't specific enough. And one of the other questions I have has to do with districts. What is a district? Because as far as I know, everything is a zone. We don't have districts.
Zoning district.
Blending of zoning districts. Okay, so you could take districts out and just have zone there, correct?
Well, you know, zoning districts are, you know, you can have just like when we say we have midtown, downtown, and then each, our comprehensive plan is built around the north, the midtown, different districts as well. So you can have 3 different C1 districts. So the zoning is C1, okay?
Right.
The different districts are, where that zone lies. And so you can even granularize further down from that is what that's the suggestion.
It seems to be overkill. I really feel that we have certain specific areas that we would like to tighten up. And having someone that you would have submit a proposal under this criteria seems like you're redesigning the whole our whole approach to development and zoning. And the other thing that kind of bothers me is it says in here that people can provide a submittal and that the group that will determine who wins this doesn't really even need to go further than a submittal. They can be selected without an interview or knowing if they understand our community. That's been one of the big problems, I think, is that cookie cutter instead of honoring the village.
I don't think that these are suggestions that are being made. I mean, it has to go through a whole public process to hone in what we want to keep and what we don't want to keep in terms of their recommendations. I would think that's what I see as a strategy.
The scope is purposely made general so that when we get down to like their proposals and how they would accomplish things, then we can go ahead and refine things. Because I'm looking, I would say that the biggest ones, to Robin's point, A, B, which explains what happened in A, the concurrency with the master plan and planning documents, that's C, overall cohesiveness and consistency and eliminate possible redundancies and cross-referentiality. That's one of the things from a staff standpoint, we see that there's conflicts or where there's not clarity on a definition or something.
Mm-hmm.
So those are what we're talking about, and you give the other side the ability to, we may or may not want to, and I think that Jeff just said, let's possibly change our approach when we're talking about the transportation system plan to not tie them, that we would go ahead and we would start this process. I think we would be silly if we didn't, as we got close to the end of both of those, if we didn't look to make sure we weren't covering all the things that we wanted to cover, but it's not driving the proposal as much as it was before. I understand Robin's point. I think there's some things in here that are not totally specific to it, but they're not untied to it. And I don't think that
It encourages a freer way of looking at development than I thought the whole purpose of our going forward with this was, which is to tighten it up and follow our comprehensive plan.
Right, and that's A, B, and C. And E. And then the compliance with state law. We've not compared to state law in a long time, so I think that's.
Well, we're smaller than who needs to comply with state law.
There might be aspects here from a planning standpoint, but just overall state law, I think we need to stay in compliance. If it doesn't apply to us, it doesn't apply, but if there's anything else from a land use standpoint.
Well, DLCD is driving a situation for larger communities, which we are not. and our size does not have to comply.
There's lots of the Oregon state law that we have to comply with. All of
Oh, well,
the
yes,
planning goals we have to apply.
but all of the infill and that sort of thing is not a requirement of our size.
There's definitely lots of land development that's set for the metro area for certain size cities, but there's plenty of state law that we have to apply with.
They are 10,000 or larger.
There's various levels for different land use. Are you talking about?
Well, different, but I'm talking about this infill and combining zoning groups.
No one's deciding to combine any zoning groups. I don't know what that comes from.
If I may chime in here, the project details to me work quite well. I think they work for describing the effort that we're trying to find so that we can make our zoning and our ordinances workable. That's the issue that I'm running into, and I think I know that Jeff's running into a lot, is the cross-referencing and all that sort of stuff. The project description later on does get into the language that Robin's concerned about, and I'm a little concerned about in a couple places. Other places I really am appreciative. The fact that they mention that the comprehensive plan is essential and that the new code be developed on the vision that's already there. That's a key to me. But the other thing is what we're asking for is somebody to do a review of what's wrong with our zone, our ordinances, so that we can then come in and fix them. They're not fixing them. We fix them. They give us what they have found as, you might say, industry standards that
Sam,
are
this,
up to date.
Sam, this is giving wrong detail about what we're looking for. It says right here, this would ideally include a blending of zoning districts, subcategories within each district, and overlays that allow special uses for districts depending on the district location and geographically within the city. It's encouraging blending the zones.
It's encouraging them telling us what it looks like if we were to blend them. We make the decision to do the blending if we like it or not.
Yeah.
They're not making this decision to blend anything.
Yeah,
They're giving us the presentation of what it would be like if we were to look at it in a blended, new terminologies that we're not used to and all that kind of stuff.
Robin, my only thought through that sentence there is that exactly like Sam says, is we may even want to use form-based codes with our current ordinances. And so it's a blending of different techniques and tools to get to what we want in, whether it's the downtown district or midtown district or whatever. I'm not trying to blend anything. You have mixed use already. I mean, I can't blend any more than you got. You got mixed use, you got planned development. Those are blends. So, you know, these are just trying to use planning and zoning language, modern language, and trying to get these things more in line where we're not looking at, I'm having to go through three different ordinances or different parts of the ordinances to which conflict right now, and streamline that so it's in one section, not just for us, but for you guys when you're reviewing, and for the citizen who's trying to build something. So.
And the purpose of bringing this to you tonight was to say, here's the suggested scope. And if you have any comments or you want to change it, this is your opportunity.
It looks fine to me. I don't have, I understand what the purpose of it is, and I think it covers everything that we wanted to look at and pare it down from there after we get all the recommendations
Mhm.
and analysis. So I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I guess that's the key, that we can pare it down. I feel like it's has ballooned into something much bigger than I had envisioned, frankly. Looking at our zoning ordinances and making sure they
That is,
meet standards, but yeah, we'll still have a chance to go through and say, we don't think this is relevant, or this is too broad. We want to tighten it down. I'm thinking about steeply sloping lots. That is in trouble, and planned developments and square footage allowed, and combining lots, putting a single building. You know, if we address all those kinds of things, that's what we want done.
and I think,
I recommend some language that,
or even other ways to organize the way that you have things, you know, right now, as Jeff said, we have conflicts within our ordinances. So, but to have that depth of look and saying that to get where you want to be, we recommend you try it this way.
yeah, going through and taking a look at what we have now and where the conflicts are and where that is the audit. I feel like this takes it a step beyond, because here's recommended language, or here's our suggestions on how you change this whole chapter. And it's probably value in that. It's just gone beyond what I envisioned when we first started talking about it. But I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah. I think that, you know, in my mind, it was, you know, you do the audit and then you work through the solutions, and that's part of what these other sections do.
Yeah, so they're gonna do both. They're gonna do an audit. There's problems, and then they're gonna make recommendations.
And they're going to try to solve the problems for us.
All right.
And we'll work through all those things and say, no to that, we like this. But we're not obligated to take anything that they provide.
It'll be a working document.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, you know, it definitely will, but might be looking a little different than what we have now. If it works better for us.
I agree with Mike. My sense is that this is bigger than I had anticipated, but I am finding that I understand where this is headed. And I understand also that Jeff is overwhelmed. So my take on it would have been staff heavy, and staff is already too heavy. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I'd like to acknowledge that your proposal is exactly as the council had asked you to do, to pare it down and to take out the transportation language. Thank you very much for doing that. And I look forward to moving forward with this.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, then.
So this will be
Any
the
last
scope. Okay, so this will be used as the scope when we do the RFP. Thank you.
Last item is Bruce, outdoor dining. Talk about that.
Well, it's not just outdoor dining. The well, first of all, we're going back and forth with the governor's categories, and that's creating problems. And the one thing that is common for the restaurants is that outdoor dining seems to be able to be something that they're not dealing with as much as they are the indoor dining. And so I think it was the emergency declaration, you gave staff the ability to work with folks, which we did tents and we did some allowing dining in parking lots, but not everybody has a parking lot. Excuse me. So we wanted to make sure that you were still good with that direction for us to go ahead and solve problems as we go through at least the summer. Doesn't look like there's going to be a whole lot of changes on it. And also, one thing that does seem to be possible for the restaurants that don't have large parking areas is, and we sent some pictures, is to set off a certain number of parking places right outside the restaurant and then allow dining within that. And wanted to make sure if we were to say yes to that, that we were not going beyond what you wanted us to authorize.
They're doing that all over Portland and other
Yeah.
cities, and
Yes.
I guess
some of them
my,
look really nice, some of them just look tacky. So,
just so that it fits police and fire requirements.
Sure. Yeah, and we're looking at possibly supplying the barricades because I'm a little nervous about having a potted plant behind a family and somebody goes off track and, drives through the place or something. But we're looking at something like that. But the rest of the decoration or whatever would be on the restaurant owner.
Okay, so I'm a little, are you talking about putting tables and benches and all that stuff in parking spaces like on Hemlock and Spruce?
Directly in front of restaurants, not all the way up and down. We still have to sort out how many you would get, that kind of thing. But what it does, it does take away some parking, but it allows the restaurant to have a constant number of seats that they're able to continue to serve when they're going indoor yes, indoor no.
Would that affect the driving, somebody driving down the street, worrying about hitting somebody sitting there at a table?
If they drive into where the parking spots would be, yes. But we're not talking about impacting the roadway itself. It would be on either side of the roadway. You would either have cars there, or now you might have a barricade at each end, and then tables where people are sitting. The barricades themselves are 8 feet.
I've seen all the-
The barricades are 8 feet that we're looking at, and the parking places are 9.
And who would pay for it?
Well, if you look in there, there's quite a hodgepodge of things, and I don't know if that would be exactly what we want to see, or if we want to have some sort of uniformity. If we wanted some sort of uniformity, then I would suggest that the city, and Karen's been doing a great job trying to find people that would loan us some, but to use those barricades because I think they're good from the standpoint if somebody is not paying attention. We have a barricade at the end.
What kind of barricade are you talking?
It's one of those shaped kind of like this with a wider base. It's concrete. They're not beautiful.
Jersey barricades.
Yeah, I think it's in the, one of
those pictures I showed you.
Yeah.
How about these orange and white plastic?
No, I don't, maybe you want the orange and white plastic, but yeah, I was preferring the
How about
ones.
the concrete
Yes.
that divide highways?
Yeah, that Story has owns in
Yeah,
Astoria.
yeah.
I didn't see.
And if we did that, I think that the city should get those. We can borrow them. We would have to move them, that kind of thing. But other than that, I think that the owners should pay for whatever else happens in that location. If you don't want us to go for that uniformity, which I don't know a whole bunch of those that are uniform, they're not the most beautiful things. But if you want to have the owners kind of take I don't think the owners would take the risk on the safety. I think that we would have some liability probably.
Well, that's the other question is if something does happen and someone's driving and happens to run into somebody at the table, whose liability is that?
I think it would depend on the facts. I think that if a driver drives into an area that either if there's cars parked there, or if we've got, barricades or there's people there, it would almost always be mostly on the driver. Is there a case somebody could make where you shouldn't let somebody park in have a restaurant in a parking area? That's something that we can do. We can just change the striping on the road and make that part of the sidewalk.
If there'd been a car there, they'd hit that too.
Yes.
Yeah, but
But to me, it's just
and
like,
injury when somebody's sitting at the table.
yeah, but to me, the potential for the injury is somebody just coming straight in from the back and having nothing to slow the car down. Less than, driving along the side and pulling in. So we're trying to look out for safety as much as we can. In that case, I think we would probably be the ones, but I always trust Karen to find a great deal. And I think she might have found somebody that may loan us some, depending how many we need.
And are we talking just one parking space per restaurant or?
No, I don't know how we would calculate that, but where they have them, they're usually, at least 3 or 4 parking spaces.
How long are we going to do this?
Probably, I don't know, the way it's written now, I think it's till the end of the emergency decree. But I think that it depends. I would do it as long as we want to support the restaurants because they're having such a hard time. And if they think that this will help them and they're willing to invest in it, I think that we go as long as those conditions still exist.
So spring break and summer months?
Possibly.
Or until the governor says you can have indoor dining.
Well, yeah, that'll happen.
I do recall that when we were talking about blocking some of the streets, some of the retail people were not in favor of that because it cut off the flow to their businesses.
Well, we won't be closing any streets. There'll just be parking.
No, but there wouldn't be a place for people to park next to their store.
Yes, that would be true.
Could I ask one thing on this is that we've also had the request, at least for those that are doing the outdoor dining in their parking areas now, their own private parking areas, they're wanting some kind of sense of if there is kind of a time that they can at least have expectations that they can do this too, whether it's at Labor Day, end of summer or whatever, that they know so they have some kind of sense. So not to say that's for the street parking, but at least for those that are already kind of set up for the upcoming season, can they have some kind of guarantee or can we say that?
I think that, understanding what you're saying, Jeff, I think that we should make this opportunity available and then let people say, we want to be in or we don't. I think that doing it short term, do we bring in barricades? And also I think that we would be potentially suddenly taking parking during the busiest season, the busiest times. So I think if people get used to it, but I don't feel strongly either way on that.
Barricades are really an unattractive look. It's concrete.
I agree.
I kind of also feel like there should be a hard line date. I would say Labor Day weekend, definitely they're gone by Labor Day weekend. But could be sooner, could be that we rediscuss it in May to find out whether things have gotten worse or not. But I would definitely give the restaurants a hard date because that's the one thing that really is messing them up right now is this back and forth stuff. So.
The only thing I caution you guys on is that it was busier than it's been in a long time last summer, and we're going into the busy season of spring break and summer. And if you're gonna be taking parking spots away till Labor Day, it's gonna be a zoo with pedestrians as well.
I totally agree with that. I think this is my feeling that once people start getting enough vaccines out and this spring starts blooming, folks are just going to come out of the woodwork and we're going to get slammed this summer.
And I think that if we're at the point that the restrictions are no longer on indoor dining, that's the date that we say you're done with that. You don't get more seating than you had before.
So they can have it the earliest of either indoor dining is allowed or Labor Day. A date certain.
Well, are we talking about 100% indoor dining? Are we talking about
That's-
75%? I mean, because that's how they're demarcated on the risk and high risk areas. So are we talking, I mean, 100%? We probably won't get to 100% until fall at least.
We're going to have meetings on this topic again later in the spring because it's going to be constantly changing. So if it does change to 75% indoor dining or some weird number, we can adjust. But I do think when it's 100%, there's no more on-street dining and there's no more parking lot dining.
And again, I understand the problem with losing parking, but I'm probably more interested in keeping the restaurants open, and we pay for convenience on that.
And if it's only the parking in front of the restaurant, theoretically, it's not hurting somebody else's business because it's in front of their business, but we'll see. I mean, it depends on who steps up and wants to do this.
So is it okay if we have the ability to work with folks? And there might be some places, like if you're on a corner, you may not be able to get right in front of your door because there's going to be safety issues with that. But if we can work with folks and then say that, because they're going to have to make an investment. So we work with folks and say that if you hit 100% or 75% inside, they come out. Or, you know, what they're going to want, I agree with Sam, they're going to want a hard date. And I would like to push it out as far as we can to help.
The season will get in your way.
What do you mean?
Summer.
Season will get in your way. What do you mean get in your way?
Well, it's like we can do it as long as we want. However, I think when it's summer, that's
It's gonna be hell.
Well, that's why I said Labor Day.
You know, and also, I don't know if we're going to be talking about a huge number of parking places. We might be talking about 20 or 25 spread out, you know, throughout.
already whining about not having enough parking.
Yes, that's
Oh,
all.
I totally agree.
I've been doing that ever since I moved.
Yes, yes. It's just, are we going to sacrifice parking to be able to help the restaurants? That's what this is about.
And I like to eat outdoors, so. Well, I think staff needs to have some flexibility, looking at each case by case, and having some authority to say whether that's going to work or not within these broad guidelines.
Yeah.
Can't be any permanent structures.
Right.
But Jeff's not going to allow that.
Right.
Okay.
So I guess the, if you all agree with Mike, it would be the time frame. And I would suggest, as Sam said, Labor Day weekend, or when they say 100% dining, indoor dining.
Right.
Let's try that.
Yeah, let's try that. If staff has any really odd requests from some restaurant, bring it back to us. If things really dramatically change, bring it back to us.
Yes.
What are you looking
Okay. We have our direction. Thank you.
at? Okay. Oh, that's our last item. Cool. Anybody have anything for good of the order?
I do, Sam Bruce. I was talking to Mark Reckman. I don't know if he wants to say anything right now, but the fire district board is asking for a joint meeting with council. And they're looking towards the end of March. And there are 2 weeks that are possible, and that's the week of March 15th or the week of March 29th. And so asking, are you ready to have that discussion? And will those weeks work? Without trying to go ahead and set specific dates now, we'll just try to get your dates, try to get that information, then we'll forward them dates.
Okay.
And what we'll probably do is have it in this room. We still won't be allowing public in, but we could have the board move all the chairs and everything so that we've got a huge round circle here.
Sounds fine.
Mark, anything you want to add to that?
Nope, you had it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
At the risk level guidance for the state Oregon Health Authority, as long as we're in any risk guidance, the max capacity inside of a restaurant is 50% of people.
So we have to be completely out of risk.
We have to be completely done with doing risk factors in order to not have that be a capacity to shrink there inside down,
Unless they modify that.
unless it changes.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Unless it changes.
Yes, I know.
Okay. Pick a week, somebody, for all of them.
Those weeks seem, okay. Unless anybody says, no, I can't do that week, we'll try to set them up in those 2 weeks.
Okay.
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else? Good to the order? Nope. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.
See you all tomorrow night.